welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Or, I might show up at your door. I'm just here to share some creepy stories, so sit back and enjoy. Disclaimer: the content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. Encrypted audio log, personal device. User, D. Pike Communications Specialist. Date, March 15, 2025. Time, 23:47 Mountain Standard Time. Location, NORAD Complex, Cheyenne Mountain. If you're hearing this, something's gone wrong. Really wrong. I'm not sure who I'm recording this for. Maybe myself, maybe whoever finds this device if I don't make it out. My name is Dostan Pike, and I've been working communications monitoring at NORAD for 3 years now. Tonight was supposed to be routine. Night shifts always are. Just me and the humming servers, watching satellite feeds that never show anything more interesting than weather patterns and commercial aircraft. The complex at night has this particular quality, sterile and tomb-like. The corridors stretch endlessly under the mountain, lit by those harsh fluorescent strips that make everything look sickly pale. The air recycling system creates this constant low hum that gets into your bones after a while. You'd think being inside a mountain would feel secure, but there's something about all that rock above you that makes the walls feel like they're closing in. My workstation sits in Communications Bay 7, surrounded by banks of monitors displaying data streams from dozens of satellites. The screens cast this blue-white glow that's the only real light in the room after they dim the overheads at 2,200 hours. Tonight I was monitoring the usual civilian air traffic, weather satellite feeds, the occasional military transport crossing the continental airspace. Nothing unusual. Nothing that should have triggered what happened next. I just finished my routine systems check when the first anomaly appeared. A small red indicator on my secondary monitor, the one that handles atmospheric disturbance reports. At first, I thought it was equipment malfunction. These old systems glitch constantly, throwing false positives that waste everyone's time. I was reaching for my coffee when the indicator started flashing. The automated voice came through my headset, crisp and emotionless. Atmospheric anomaly detected. Sector 7 Alpha through 12 Delta. Classification pending. I pulled up the data stream. What I saw made my stomach drop. The satellite feeds were showing interference. Not the usual kind you get from solar activity or equipment failure. This was different, organized. The static patterns formed almost geometric shapes across multiple feeds simultaneously, like someone was drawing on the sky itself. That's when I noticed my desk clock. It read 23:47, the same time I'd started this log. I glanced at my computer timestamp, 23:47. My watch, 23:47. All different devices, all showing the exact same time down to the second. That's not possible. Digital clocks drift. They're never perfectly synchronized unless they're actively syncing, and my watch runs on a different frequency than the facility systems. I tried to shake it off, focus on the data. The interference patterns were spreading across sectors now, jumping between satellites in a way that defied physics. Signals don't behave like that. They don't coordinate across multiple platforms without a central broadcast source, and my equipment showed no such source. The intercom crackled to life. Pike, report to Operations Command. Now, that was Director Sky's voice. Vanya Sky, 15 years military intelligence, transferred to NORAD 6 months ago with clearance levels that made everyone nervous. She never called anyone directly unless it was serious. Very serious. I saved my data logs, grabbed my security badge, and headed through the maze of corridors toward Operations Command. The fluorescent lights seemed dimmer than usual, casting long shadows that moved strangely as I walked. My footsteps echoed off the concrete walls, creating this hollow percussion that made me acutely aware of how alone I was down here. Operations Command sits at the heart of the complex, behind 3 separate security checkpoints and blast doors thick enough to survive a direct nuclear hit. The main floor is a cathedral of screens and workstations, all focused on the massive display wall that shows North American airspace in real time. Usually, it's a peaceful constellation of green dots representing civilian aircraft and the occasional military transport. Tonight, it looked like someone had spilled red paint across the continent. Director Sky stood at the central command console, her silver hair pulled back in that regulation bun that never showed a hair out of place. She was younger than her rank suggested, maybe 45, but carried herself with the rigid posture of someone who'd seen combat. Her eyes, pale gray like winter sky, fixed on me as I approached. "Pike, good. I need you to verify something for me." She gestured at the main display. "These signatures. Tell me what you see." I studied the screen. Dozens of red indicators were scattered across the continental United States, each one pulsing in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. They appeared to be aircraft signatures, but unlike anything I'd seen before. No altitude data, no speed indicators, no identification transponders. Just red dots appearing and disappearing across the airspace like ghosts. "Director, I'm not sure what I'm looking at. These don't match any known aircraft profiles. No flight plans, no communication protocols. It's like they're not really there." Her expression didn't change. "That's what I was afraid of. How long have you been monitoring tonight?" I checked my watch again. Still 23:47. "About 4 hours, ma'am. Since 1930 hours." But even as I said it, something felt wrong. Had it really been 4 hours? The time hadn't changed, but I distinctly remembered checking the clock multiple times during my shift. "Pike, I need you to understand something. What you're seeing on these screens, these signatures, they're not showing up on any other monitoring station. Not Washington, not Peterson, not even our backup systems. Only your workstation in Communications Bay 7 is detecting them." The words hit me like cold water. "That's impossible, Director. If I'm seeing them, they should be showing up on. They should be. But they're not." She turned to face me fully, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. "Pike, in 30 years of military service, I've never seen anything like this. These signatures, they're appearing simultaneously across multiple time zones, moving in patterns that violate every law of physics I know." A new alarm started sounding. Not the usual facility alerts, but something deeper, more urgent. The overhead lights shifted from white to red, bathing the command center in an ominous glow. The main display flickered, and for just a moment, the red signatures seemed to form a pattern. Not random aircraft scattered across the continent, but something deliberate, organized. Director Sky's radio crackled. "Command, this is Peterson Base. We're showing clear skies across all sectors. No anomalous readings. Request confirmation of your status." She looked at me, then at the display still showing dozens of red signatures. "Pike, I need you to get back to your station. Document everything. And Pike," she paused, her voice dropping to almost a whisper, "don't trust anything you see tonight. Not the screens, not the data, not even your own senses. Something is very wrong here." As I headed back through the corridors, the fluorescent lights continued their sickly flicker, and I could swear I heard something underneath the constant hum of the air recyclers. Static. Faint but constant, like a radio tuned between stations. But there were no radios in the corridors. I'm back at my workstation now, and the red signatures are still there. Still pulsing. Still impossible. My clock still reads 23:47, and I'm beginning to think it's going to stay that way for a very long time. The static is getting louder. Encrypted audio log, personal device. User, D. Pike Communications Specialist. Date, March 16, 2025. Time, 6:15 Mountain Standard Time. Location, NORAD Complex, Cheyenne Mountain. I haven't slept. Can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see those red signatures pulsing across the Continental display. It's been 7 hours since my last log, but my workstation clock still shows 23:47. Always 23:47. I've rebooted the system 3 times, checked the network synchronization, even called IT. They say everything's functioning normally, but it's not normal. Nothing about last night was normal. I spent the remaining hours of my shift going through archive data, looking for anything similar. What I found made my hands shake so badly I could barely type. The patterns, those geometric formations in the atmospheric interference, they've appeared before. Not exactly the same, but close enough to make my skin crawl. June 1987. Similar atmospheric anomalies detected across the Soviet Union during the height of Cold War tensions. The signatures appeared for exactly 6 hours before vanishing. No explanation in the classified files. October 1995. Coordinated interference patterns over the Middle East, coinciding with heightened military activity. Duration: 6 hours. Status: unresolved. February 2001. Continental United States. 6 hours of impossible aerial signatures that defied radar logic. The report was buried so deep I needed 3 different clearance codes to access it. Always 6 hours. Always unexplained. Always classified beyond reason. I pulled up the personnel files for the communication specialists who were on duty during those incidents. What I found made my coffee taste like ash. Every single one of them requested transfers within weeks of their shifts. 2 took early retirement. 1. A guy named Marcus Chun from the 2001 incident suffered what his medical records called acute stress reaction with paranoid features. He spent 6 months in a military psychiatric facility. The file included a transcript of his debriefing. His words burned into my memory. They weren't aircraft. They weren't anything that should exist in our reality. And the worst part? I think they were watching us back. I tried calling my sister Emma this morning. She lives in Denver with her husband and 2 kids. My nephew Jake just turned 8, and little Sophia is starting kindergarten. They're everything I have left after Mom and Dad died in that car accident 3 years ago. Emma's the reason I took this job, actually. Good pay, federal benefits, close enough to visit on weekends but far enough that I don't crowd her new family. The call wouldn't go through. Not busy signal, not voicemail, just dead air. I tried her cell, her husband's phone, even the kids' school. Same result every time. Like Denver had dropped off the communication grid entirely. That's when I noticed him watching me. Riven Cross sits 3 workstations over in the cybersecurity section. Mid-30s, thin as a wire, with that pale complexion you get from spending too much time in front of screens. He's got these sharp green eyes that miss nothing, and right now they were fixed on me with an intensity that made my neck prickle. When I looked up, he quickly turned back to his monitors, but I could see him glancing in my direction every few minutes. Around 0800 hours, he finally approached my workstation. Riven moves like a cat, silent, deliberate, always ready to bolt. He's worked at NORAD for 2 years, transferred from NSA with a security clearance that even Director Sky respects. Nobody talks to Riven unless they have to, and he likes it that way. Pike. His voice was barely above a whisper. We need to talk. I looked around the communications bay. The day shift was settling in, but everyone was absorbed in their own tasks. Still, Riven's paranoia was infectious. About what? About last night. About what you saw on the displays. He leaned closer, and I caught a whiff of stale coffee and anxiety sweat. I've been monitoring the network traffic. Something's wrong with the data streams. Really wrong. Before I could respond, my workstation chimed with an incoming priority message. The header made my blood run cold. Automated DEFCON shift recommendation. Communications Specialist Pike, D. I opened the message with trembling fingers. The content was brief and terrifying. Analysis of overnight atmospheric anomalies suggests elevated threat potential. Recommend DEFCON status adjustment from 5 to 3. Current continental defense posture insufficient for detected signature patterns. Escalation protocols should be reviewed immediately. This is an automated assessment based on communications specialist Pike's monitoring data. The message was signed by the NORAD Threat Assessment AI, a system I'd never heard of in 3 years of working here. I looked at Riven, whose face had gone even paler. "That's impossible," I whispered. "We don't have automated DEFCON recommendation systems. That kind of decision requires human authorization at the highest levels." Riven's fingers flew across his keyboard, pulling up network diagnostics. "Pike, this message didn't come from any external system. According to the routing data, it originated from your workstation. Your terminal sent a DEFCON recommendation to the Joint Chiefs based on data that shouldn't exist. The implications hit me like a physical blow. If my terminal was generating military threat assessments without my knowledge, it meant someone or something had compromised the most secure military installation in North America. But that was impossible. NORAD's cybersecurity was legendary, built on multiple redundant systems that would detect any intrusion instantly. "There's more," Riven continued, his voice barely audible. "I've been tracking the network traffic from your workstation for the past 6 hours. You've been sending encrypted transmissions to external addresses. Lots of them. Automated bursts every few minutes." I stared at him. "That's insane. I haven't sent anything to anyone. I can't even get through to my sister in Denver." "That's just it, Pike. The transmissions aren't going to Denver. They're going to locations I can't trace. The encryption is unlike anything in our standard protocols. It's like your terminal is talking to something that doesn't officially exist." A chill ran down my spine as I remembered Director Sky's words. "Don't trust anything you see tonight. Not the screens, not the data, not even your own senses." I pulled up my personal communication logs, scrolling through the records of my attempts to call Emma. According to the system, I hadn't made any calls at all. No record of trying to reach Denver, no failed connection attempts, nothing. But I distinctly remembered dialing her number, hearing that dead air, the growing panic when nothing went through. "Riven, I need you to help me figure out what's happening here. These atmospheric signatures, the impossible data, the automated messages, none of it makes sense." He nodded, but I could see the fear in his eyes. "There's something else you need to know." I pulled the personnel files for everyone who's reported similar anomalies in the past. The pattern isn't just about the incidents themselves. It's about what happened to the people who witnessed them. "What do you mean?" They all showed the same progression. First, equipment malfunctions that only they could see. Then, communication problems with the outside world. Then, automated systems that seemed to develop their own agenda. He paused, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. "And finally, they started questioning their own memories. What was real, what was system error, what was something else entirely?" The fluorescent lights above us flickered, and for just a moment, I could swear I heard that static again. Faint but persistent, like voices just beyond the range of human hearing. When I looked at my workstation clock, it still read 23:47. "Pike," Riven said, his eyes wide with something approaching terror. "What if the real question isn't what those signatures represent? What if the question is, why can only you see them?" As he walked away, I noticed something that made my hands start shaking again. The reflection on my black monitor screen showed my workstation clearly, but when I looked directly at the physical terminal, some of the displays were different. Slightly but noticeably different, like looking at two versions of the same reality that didn't quite align. I'm starting to understand why Marcus Chin ended up in that psychiatric facility. The static is getting louder and I think, God help me, I think it's trying to tell me something. Encrypted audio log, personal device. User, D. Pike Communications Specialist. Date, March 16, 2025. Time, 14:30 Mountain Standard Time. Location, NORAD Complex, Cheyenne Mountain Restricted Archive Level. The deeper I dig, the more I realize this rabbit hole doesn't just go down, it goes back. Way back. I'm recording this from Sublevel 7, in the archived data storage facility that most people don't even know exists. It took me 3 hours to get the clearance codes, and another 2 to convince the automated systems that I had legitimate research purposes. The air down here smells like ozone and old electronics, with the constant hum of climate control systems keeping decades of classified information from degrading into digital ash. Riven was right to be paranoid. What we discovered this morning was just the tip of something massive and impossible. After our conversation, I couldn't focus on routine communications monitoring. Every time I tried to run standard satellite feeds, my workstation would glitch, not crash exactly, but display information that didn't match the raw data streams. It was like someone had installed a filter between reality and my perception of it, showing me a version of the world that was almost, but not quite, accurate. So I did what any rational person would do in an irrational situation. I went completely off-book. Using Riven's cybersecurity credentials and my own communications access, we managed to penetrate the archived threat assessment database. What we found there made the overnight atmospheric anomalies look like a minor weather disturbance. The inbound hostiles alert isn't new. It's not even uncommon. According to classified records dating back to 1958, 3 years after NORAD was established, similar alerts have been generated an average of once every 3 to 4 years. Always the same basic pattern. Atmospheric anomalies that shouldn't exist, radar signatures that defy physics, and electromagnetic interference that forms geometric patterns too complex to be natural. But here's where it gets genuinely terrifying. Every single incident has been classified under what the files call Exercise Nightfall, a designation that doesn't appear in any official NORAD training manual or operational doctrine. As far as the public record is concerned, Exercise Nightfall doesn't exist. The earliest report I could access was from December 1962, during the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Communications specialist Harold Vance reported impossible aerial phenomena that appeared on radar for exactly 6 hours before vanishing without explanation. His subsequent debriefing, heavily redacted, includes phrases like coordinated intelligence and observational response patterns. What caught my attention wasn't the phenomena itself. It was Vance's personal account, buried in a psychiatric evaluation report. The signals weren't random. They were responding to our monitoring activities. When I adjusted radar sensitivity, the patterns would shift. When I changed frequencies, they would adapt. It was like they knew we were watching, and they were watching us back. I felt my skin crawl as I read those words, because they perfectly described what I'd experienced last night. The atmospheric signatures that seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. The electromagnetic interference that intensified whenever I focused on it too closely. The pattern repeated through the decades. 1967. Similar phenomena during the Six-Day War. 1973. Extensive electromagnetic anomalies coinciding with the Yom Kippur War. 1983. The most detailed report coinciding with Able Archer 83, the NATO exercise that nearly triggered World War III. That 1983 report was different, more comprehensive, more frightening, and signed by someone I recognized, General Patricia Wynne, who would later become NORAD's first female commander. Her analysis was clinical but deeply unsettling. The phenomena demonstrate characteristics of advanced intelligence gathering. Pattern analysis suggests systematic evaluation of our defensive capabilities, communication protocols, and decision-making processes. Most concerning, the phenomena appear to anticipate our responses with 94.7% accuracy. Recommend immediate implementation of Protocol 77 Alpha. I'd never heard of Protocol 77 Alpha, but the reference number led me to another classified section. What I found there made my hands shake so badly I could barely operate the terminal. Protocol 77 Alpha wasn't a defensive measure. It was a psychological evaluation protocol. Specifically, it was designed to assess whether personnel experiencing anomalous phenomena were suffering from stress-induced hallucinations, foreign psychological warfare, or And this is the part that made my blood run cold. Exposure to non-conventional intelligence operations. The protocol's implementation checklist was terrifyingly familiar. Subject reports impossible radar signatures. Subject experiences communication equipment malfunctions visible only to them. Subject's workstation generates automated alerts without authorization. Subject reports inability to contact external parties. Subject begins questioning the nature of observed phenomena. I was checking off every single criteria, but the most disturbing discovery was in the personnel files for everyone who'd ever been subjected to Protocol 77 Alpha. Without exception, they all reported the same progression. First, equipment anomalies that only they could perceive. Then, communication blackouts with the outside world. Finally, the growing suspicion that they were being monitored, tested, or manipulated by unknown parties. Half of them received psychiatric treatment. A quarter took early retirement. And the rest simply disappeared from the records entirely. No forwarding addresses, no pension information, no death certificates. Like they'd never existed at all. I was so absorbed in the files that I almost missed the sound of footsteps approaching through the archive corridors. Heavy boots on metal flooring, moving with military precision. I quickly closed the classified databases and pretended to be reviewing routine communication logs. The footsteps stopped directly outside the archive room. Through the reinforced glass, I could see a figure in military uniform, but the lighting was too dim to make out details. They stood there for almost 5 minutes, completely motionless, before finally moving on. It was only after they'd gone that I realized something impossible. According to the security logs, I was the only person authorized to be in the archive level today. Whoever had been standing outside shouldn't have been able to access this section at all. I tried to call Riven on the internal communication system, but got nothing but static. Not the same static I'd been hearing in the electromagnetic interference. This was different. Harsher, more chaotic, like multiple voices speaking simultaneously in languages I couldn't identify. That's when my personal phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. Citizen Preparedness Advisory. Denver metro area. Unusual atmospheric conditions detected. Residents advised to remain indoors and monitor emergency broadcast systems. This is not a drill. I stared at the message, feeling the walls of the archive room seem to close in around me. Denver, where my sister Emma lives with her family, where I haven't been able to reach anyone for over 12 hours. I immediately tried calling Emma again, using both the NORAD communication system and my personal phone. Same result. Dead air. Like the entire city had been erased from the telecommunications grid. But as I was hanging up, I heard something that made my blood freeze. In the dead air, just before the connection terminated, I could swear I heard Emma's voice. Faint, distorted, but unmistakably her. Dastan? Dastan, where are you? Something's wrong here. Something's very wrong. I've tried calling back 17 times. Each time, the same result. Dead air, followed by what might be Emma's voice, saying the same words with the same desperate tone. I'm starting to think the real question isn't what the atmospheric anomalies represent, or why they seem to be targeting communications specialists specifically. The real question is, what if the phenomena aren't coming from outside at all? What if they're coming from inside NORAD itself? I found one more file in the archives, buried so deep it took me 2 hours to locate it. A single-page document dated last week, March 10th, 2025, with the header Exercise Nightfall, Phase 7 Implementation. The document contained only 2 lines. Subject D. Pike identified for comprehensive evaluation. Protocol 77 Alpha authorized for immediate implementation. It was signed by Director Vanya Sky. I need to find Leora Dusk. She's Emma's friend, works as an emergency coordinator for Denver Metro. If anyone can tell me what's really happening in the city, it's her. But more importantly, I need to understand why Director Sky has been planning this evaluation for a week, when the atmospheric anomalies only started appearing last night. Unless they didn't start last night at all. Unless I'm just now becoming aware of something that's been going on much longer than I realized. The static is getting stronger, and I think I can hear voices in it now. Familiar voices. Emma's voice, pleading for help. Riven's voice, warning me about something I can't quite understand. And underneath it all, a voice that might be my own, saying words I don't remember speaking. The hostiles aren't inbound. They're already here. They've always been here. And they're inside everything we think we can trust. My workstation clock still shows 23:47, but according to my personal phone, it's been showing that time for over 14 hours now. Either I'm losing my mind, or time itself is becoming unreliable. I think I know which one it is, and I think I know why. The question is, what am I going to do about it? Encrypted audio log, personal device. User, D. Pike Communications Specialist. Date, March 16, 2025. Time, 1845 Mountain Standard Time. Location, NORAD Complex, Cheyenne Mountain Personal Vehicle, Parking Level C. I'm recording this from my car because it's the only place I can think that might not be monitored. Even then, I'm not sure. Nothing feels safe anymore. Nothing feels real. Director Sky found me in the archives. I was still trying to process the implications of that Protocol 77 Alpha document when the lights in the archive room suddenly brightened to their maximum intensity. The environmental controls kicked into overdrive, and I could hear the distinct sound of security doors engaging throughout the sublevel. Someone was locking down the entire section. Mr. Pike. Her voice came from the intercom speakers, perfectly calm and professional. Please report to Archive Control Station immediately. I had no choice. The archive room's door had sealed itself, and the only way out was through the control station. As I walked down the corridor, I could hear my footsteps echoing strangely, like the sound was being recorded and played back a fraction of a second later. The fluorescent lights flickered in sequence, creating a strobe effect that made the walls seem to pulse. Director Vanya Sky was waiting for me in the control station, standing perfectly still in front of a bank of monitors displaying archive access logs. She's an imposing woman in her mid-50s, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that seem to catalog every detail of whatever she's looking at. Her uniform was immaculate as always, but something about her posture suggested she'd been waiting for quite some time. 17 hours and 43 minutes, she said without turning around. That's how long you've been accessing classified materials without proper authorization. I have clearance for communications. Communications, yes. Exercise nightfall protocols, no. She turned to face me, and I noticed something unsettling about her expression. It wasn't angry or disappointed. It was almost satisfied, like I'd done exactly what she'd expected me to do. Director, I need to understand what's happening here. The atmospheric anomalies, the personnel files, the psychological evaluation protocols. What you need to understand, Mr. Pike, is that your security clearance has been suspended pending a comprehensive review of your recent activities. She gestured to one of the monitors, which displayed my access logs for the past 18 hours. Unauthorized database queries, attempts to contact external parties during a communications blackout, and misuse of cybersecurity resources. The screen showed a timeline of my activities, but it was wrong. According to the system, I'd been accessing classified files for days, not hours. The log showed database queries from March 13th, 3 days ago, when I distinctly remembered being on routine duty with no unusual incidents. That's impossible. I didn't access any classified systems until today. The logs disagree with your recollection, Mr. Pike. Sky's voice carried a note of something that might have been pity. This is precisely why Protocol 77 Alpha exists. Personnel under extreme stress often experience significant gaps in memory and perception. She pulled up another screen showing my workstation activity. According to the data, I'd been generating automated threat assessments for over a week, each one escalating in urgency and detail. The most recent assessment, timestamped just 2 hours ago, recommended immediate implementation of DEFCON 2 protocols based on imminent continental threat assessment. I didn't write these reports, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I felt a creeping uncertainty. The writing style, the technical terminology, the specific concerns about communication protocols, it all sounded like something I might have written. Mr. Pike, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer them honestly. Your continued employment and security clearance depend on complete cooperation. She activated a recording device, and I could see my reflection in its polished surface. Pale, disheveled, with dark circles under my eyes that I didn't remember having this morning. Have you experienced any unusual auditory phenomena in the past week? I hesitated. The static, the voices, Emma's impossible phone calls. Some minor equipment interference. Have you noticed any discrepancies in time measurement or chronological perception? The clock that wouldn't move past 23:47. The logs showing activities I didn't remember performing. Maybe some minor system glitches. Have you attempted to contact external parties regarding classified NORAD operations? My repeated calls to Emma, my conversation with Riven, my plan to contact Leora Dusk. I've been trying to reach my sister in Denver. She's not answering her phone. Mr. Pike, there is no communications blackout. I've just spoken with Denver Emergency Services. Your sister is fine. She's been trying to reach you, but you haven't been answering your phone. That was impossible. I'd been trying to call Emma for hours, getting nothing but dead air. But as Sky spoke, I realized my phone had been on silent mode. When I checked my call log, there were 17 missed calls from Emma, all with timestamps showing they'd occurred while I was supposedly hearing her voice in the static. I need you to listen to me very carefully, Sky continued. You are experiencing what we call operational stress syndrome. The combination of isolation, high security responsibilities, and personal anxiety can create perceptual distortions that feel completely real to the subject. She showed me another screen displaying my biometric data from the past week. Heart rate elevated, sleep patterns disrupted, stress hormones consistently above normal levels. According to the data, I'd been showing signs of severe psychological distress for days. The atmospheric anomalies you reported are real, but they're not extraterrestrial or hostile. They're part of a routine atmospheric research project being conducted by NOAA. The electromagnetic interference you've been experiencing is a side effect of the research equipment. But the historical files, the other personnel who experienced similar, the historical files you accessed contain information from various unrelated incidents spanning decades. Your mind, under stress, has created connections between unrelated events to form a coherent narrative that explains your current psychological state. I wanted to argue, to insist that what I'd experienced was real, but doubt was creeping in. The missed calls from Emma, the logs showing activities I didn't remember, the biometric data that contradicted my own perception of my mental state. What about Riven Cross? He saw the network anomalies. Mr. Cross reported his concerns to me yesterday. He's worried about you. He never confirmed seeing any network anomalies. He confirmed that you believe you're seeing them. The walls of the control station seem to be closing in. Everything I thought I knew, everything I'd discovered, was being reframed as symptoms of a psychological breakdown. But something about Sky's explanation felt rehearsed, like she'd given this speech before. I'm placing you on administrative leave effective immediately, she continued. You'll report to Dr. Sarah Chun in medical for a comprehensive psychological evaluation. Depending on the results, you may be eligible for treatment and eventual return to duty. Dr. Chun? That's the same last name as Marcus Chen, the communications specialist from 2001 who suffered a similar stress-related breakdown and received excellent treatment. Dr. Chun is his daughter. She specializes in operational stress disorders. The symmetry was too perfect, too convenient. But as I sat there looking at the evidence of my own deteriorating mental state, I couldn't tell if the convenience was suspicious or if my paranoia was making me see patterns that didn't exist. Director, I need to ask you something directly. Did you authorize Protocol 77 Alpha for my evaluation before the atmospheric anomalies began? For the first time, Sky's expression shifted slightly. Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or calculation. Mr. Pike, there is no Protocol 77 Alpha. I've never used that designation in any official capacity, but I'd seen the document. I'd seen her signature. Unless the document had been another perceptual distortion, another symptom of my psychological breakdown. Report to Dr. Chun tomorrow at 0800 hours. Until then, you're confined to base housing. No access to classified systems. No contact with operational personnel. As I walked to my car, I tried calling Emma again. This time, she answered immediately. Dastan, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for hours. Where have you been? Her voice sounded perfectly normal. No distortion, no static, no desperation. Just my sister worried about me. I'm sorry, Em. I had my phone on silent. Work's been intense. Are you okay? You sound terrible. I wanted to tell her about the atmospheric anomalies, the classified files, the growing certainty that I was being monitored and manipulated. But sitting in my car, hearing her familiar voice, looking at the evidence of my own psychological deterioration, I couldn't find the words. I'm fine, Elite. Just tired. Can I call you tomorrow? Of course. But Dastan, if something's wrong, you can talk to me. You know that, right? After I hung up, I sat in the parking garage for a long time, trying to figure out what was real and what wasn't. The concrete walls were painted a sterile white, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that hummed with electrical interference. Or maybe that was just the static in my head. I pulled up Leora Dusk's contact information on my phone. If she really was an emergency coordinator for Denver Metro, she'd be able to tell me if there had been any atmospheric advisories, any unusual military activity, any communications blackouts. But as I stared at her number, I realized I couldn't remember how I'd gotten it. I couldn't remember when I'd last spoken to her, or even when Emma had mentioned her. The contact information could be real, or it could be another symptom of my deteriorating mental state. The red emergency lights in the parking garage flickered in sequence, and for a moment, I could swear they were pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. But maybe that was just another perceptual distortion. Maybe everything was just another perceptual distortion. Or maybe that's exactly what they want me to think. Encrypted audio log, personal device. User, D. Pike Communications Specialist. Date, March 17, 2025. Time, 6:23 Mountain Standard Time. Location, NORAD Complex, Cheyenne Mountain Medical Wing Corridor. I never made it to Dr. Chen's office. I'm recording this while hiding in a maintenance corridor between the medical wing and the primary operations center. The fluorescent lights above me are strobing in that same rhythmic pattern I noticed yesterday, but now they're synchronized with emergency lighting throughout the entire facility. Something's happening. Something big. At 0400 hours, the base-wide alert system activated with a sound I'd never heard before. Not the standard klaxon or the tornado warning tone, but something that seemed to vibrate through the mountain itself. A deep, resonant pulse that made my teeth ache and my vision blur at the edges. Emergency alert system activation. All personnel report to designated stations. Code Black initiated. Repeat, Code Black initiated. This is not a drill. Code Black isn't in any manual I've ever read. In 15 years of military and contractor service, I've never heard that designation used. But personnel throughout the facility responded immediately, moving with the kind of practiced urgency that suggests they drilled for this scenario many times. I was supposed to report to Dr. Chun, but the medical wing was sealed off with red tape and warnings about biohazard containment protocols. Through the reinforced glass windows, I could see figures in full hazmat suits working around equipment I didn't recognize. The equipment hummed with the same frequency as the static that's been plaguing our communications. That's when I realized Emma hadn't called me back. I'd promised to call her this morning, but when I checked my phone, our conversation from yesterday evening wasn't in my call log. There was no record of speaking to her at all. Instead, my phone showed 17 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize, all time-stamped during the hours I was supposedly sleeping in base housing. The missed calls led me back to the communications center, despite Director Sky's explicit orders to stay away from operational areas. The corridors were nearly empty. Most personnel had been reassigned to unknown stations as part of the Code Black protocol. But I could hear voices echoing through the ventilation system, conversations in languages I couldn't identify and some that didn't sound entirely human. Riven was still at his workstation, but something was wrong with him. Physically wrong. Riven. I approached his station cautiously. "Are you okay?" He turned to look at me, and I saw that his pupils were dilated to pinpoints. His skin had an unhealthy gray pallor, and when he spoke, his voice had a slight electronic distortion. "Dastan, you shouldn't be here. Code Black means all non-essential personnel report to containment areas." He gestured to his screens, which displayed network traffic patterns I'd never seen before. The atmospheric anomalies aren't anomalies. They're scanning frequencies. Scanning for what? Personnel psychological profiles. The electromagnetic interference you've been experiencing isn't random. It's targeted. The system has been mapping your neural responses, cataloging your memories, building a complete psychological profile. I looked at his screens more closely. The network traffic wasn't random data, it was structured like brain wave patterns, complex neural activity displayed as cascading code. And in the patterns, I could see familiar shapes. My childhood home in Colorado Springs, Emma's face, the interior of my father's old workshop. How long has this been happening? Since Protocol 77 Alpha was activated. Riven's fingers moved across his keyboard with mechanical precision. Director Sky didn't lie about the protocol not existing, not in any official capacity. It's an experimental program, off books, funded by sources that don't appear in any government database. He pulled up a classified file that showed my face alongside dozens of others, all NORAD personnel from the past 3 decades who had reported similar atmospheric anomalies, communications interference, and psychological disturbances. "We're test subjects, Dastan. The facility isn't just monitoring external threats, it's creating internal ones. Psychological warfare testing on our own personnel." "But why? What's the purpose?" Before Riven could answer, the lights in the communications center went out completely. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in red light, but the computer screens remained dark. In the silence that followed, I could hear something that made my blood run cold. My own voice, echoing through the facility's speaker system. "NORAD Command. This is Communications Specialist Dastan Pike. I am reporting confirmed hostile contact. Repeat. Confirmed hostile contact. Multiple inbound signatures detected. Estimated time to impact, 47 minutes. I hadn't made that announcement. I was standing in the communications center listening to my own voice broadcast information I'd never reported. But the voice was perfect, every inflection, every speech pattern, exactly as I would sound under extreme stress. "Riven, I didn't." When I turned to look at him, his workstation was empty. The chair was still warm, his coffee cup still steaming, but Riven was gone. On his screen, a single message blinked in red text. Subject Cross reassigned 2 deep containment protocols. The emergency broadcast continued, now featuring my voice reporting increasingly detailed information about inbound hostiles. Trajectory analysis, threat assessment levels, recommended response protocols. All delivered in my voice with my speech patterns, using technical knowledge I possessed but information I'd never accessed. I tried to contact Emma again, but my phone showed no signal. When I attempted to use the facility's landline system, every number I dialed connected to the same recording. My own voice, repeating the hostile contact announcement on an endless loop. That's when Director Sky found me. "Mr. Pike." Her voice came from the corridor behind me, but when I turned, she was standing in the doorway wearing full military dress uniform instead of her usual fatigues. "You were ordered to report to medical. Director, something's wrong." The code black alert. The broadcasts using my voice. Riven's disappearance. Mr. Cross has been transferred to a more suitable position. His psychological evaluation indicated severe paranoid tendencies and possible security risks. She stepped into the communications center, and I noticed she was wearing a sidearm, something I'd never seen her carry before. "What kind of position?" "That's classified above your current clearance level." She gestured toward the door. "You need to come with me. Dr. Chun is waiting." "I'm not going anywhere until you explain what's happening here. Why is my voice broadcasting false information? What is Protocol 77 Alpha really designed to do?" For a long moment, Sky studied my face with the same calculating expression I'd seen in the archive control station. Then she smiled, not a reassuring smile, but the kind of expression a scientist might wear when observing an interesting specimen. "Mr. Pike, how many times have you reported atmospheric anomalies to your superiors?" "3 times in the past week. According to our records, you've filed 17 separate incident reports over the past 6 months, each one describing similar phenomena, each one escalating in severity and paranoid interpretation." She activated a wall-mounted display that showed a timeline of my supposed incident reports. The pattern was clear. Gradual escalation from minor equipment interference to reports of coordinated surveillance and psychological manipulation. But I had no memory of filing most of these reports. "The broadcasts you're hearing aren't false information, Mr. Pike. They're your own words, recorded during your incident briefings and compiled into threat assessment protocols. The hostile contact announcement is based on your own analysis of the atmospheric data." "That's impossible. I never authorized that analysis for broadcast." "You didn't need to authorize it. When you filed your incident reports, you agreed to allow your analysis to be used for training and assessment purposes. What you're experiencing now is the logical extension of your own threat assessment methodology." The display showed video footage of me sitting in debriefing rooms, speaking earnestly to cameras about electromagnetic interference, personnel surveillance, and potential hostile activities. In the footage, I looked exhausted, paranoid, and completely convinced of the reality of the threats I was describing. I had no memory of any of these debriefings. "The atmospheric anomalies are real," Sky continued, "but they're not external threats. They're part of an experimental program designed to study the psychological effects of extended isolation and high-stress responsibilities on security personnel. You volunteered for the program 18 months ago." She showed me a document with my signature, authorizing participation in advanced personnel stress testing for critical infrastructure security. The signature looked authentic, but I couldn't remember signing it. "Every experience you've had, the communications interference, the historical files, even your interactions with Mr. Cross, has been carefully orchestrated to observe your psychological responses under controlled stress conditions." "What about Emma?" "My sister. Your sister Emma died in a car accident 14 months ago, Mr. Pike. Her death was the traumatic event that made you an ideal subject for this research. The phone calls you believe you've been receiving are audio constructs generated from voicemail messages and social media posts." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Emma, dead? Impossible. I'd just spoken to her yesterday. I'd been worried about her safety in Denver, planning to protect her from whatever threats were emerging." But as Sky spoke, fragmented memories began surfacing. A funeral I'd attended in a haze of grief and medication. Months of therapy sessions I'd apparently suppressed. A decision to volunteer for experimental duty as a way to cope with survivor's guilt. "The hostiles you've been tracking aren't external threats, Mr. Pike. They're your own psychological defense mechanisms, trying to create external explanations for internal trauma." She gestured to the screens around us, which now displayed brain scan imagery showing neural activity patterns. My brain, mapped and analyzed in real time, showing areas of trauma response, dissociation, and constructed memory formation. But this is all wrong, I said, even as part of me recognized the truth in what she was telling me. The timing, the other personnel files, the patterns across decades. The other personnel files are real, but they document similar experimental programs. You're not the first volunteer, Mr. Pike. You're part of a long-term study of how isolated, traumatized personnel can be gradually conditioned to accept alternate realities. The emergency broadcasts had stopped, and the facility's normal lighting was returning. But I could still hear my voice echoing through the corridors, now reporting that the hostile contact was confirmed as internal psychological projection, successfully externalized for study. The purpose of Protocol 77 Alpha, Sky continued, is to determine whether personnel experiencing severe trauma can be rehabilitated through controlled delusion management. We create scenarios that allow subjects to process their trauma through external threat narratives, then gradually guide them back to reality. And if the subjects don't respond to treatment, they're reassigned to deep containment protocols for continued study, like Riven, like the dozens of other personnel whose files I'd discovered in the archives. I looked at the screens showing my brain activity, at the evidence of my own psychological manipulation, at the documentation of 18 months of experimental treatment I couldn't remember. Everything I thought I knew about the past week, the past year, possibly longer, had been carefully constructed to serve purposes I was only beginning to understand. The choice is yours, Mr. Pike, Sky said. You can accept treatment and gradually return to reality, or you can continue to insist on the validity of your constructed memories and join Mr. Cross in deep containment. Through the communications center's windows, I could see other personnel going about their duties with mechanical efficiency. Were they real? Were they fellow subjects? Or were they part of the construction like everything else in my carefully managed reality? I thought about Emma, dead Emma, whose voice I'd been hearing for months, whose safety had driven my increasingly desperate search for threats that didn't exist. I thought about Riven, whose paranoia had mirrored my own, whose fate awaited me if I continued to resist the treatment. But I also thought about the static that contained voices speaking my name, the emergency broadcasts that knew details from my personal logs, and the too convenient timing of Director Sky's explanations. I need to ask you something directly, I said. If this is all experimental treatment, if Emma is dead and the threats aren't real, then why are you wearing a sidearm? Sky's hand moved instinctively to her weapon, and for the first time, her confident expression wavered. Standard security protocols during Code Black situations. But Code Black doesn't exist in any official manual. You told me that yourself. The screens around us flickered, and for a moment, I could see something else in the brain scan imagery. Not just my neural patterns, but multiple overlapping patterns, as if several minds were being monitored simultaneously. Mr. Pike, you need to come with me now. But I was already moving toward the emergency exit, driven by an instinct that felt more real than anything else I'd experienced in days. Whether the threats were external or internal, whether Emma was alive or dead, whether I was a test subject or a communication specialist, one thing was certain. Something in this facility was very wrong, and it was focused on me. The last thing I heard as I ran through the corridors was my own voice, broadcast throughout the facility. Hostile contact confirmed. Subject attempting breach of containment. All personnel implement capture protocols. Whether that voice belonged to the real me or the constructed me, I couldn't tell anymore. Encrypted audio log, personal device. User, D. Pike Communications Specialist. Date, March 17, 2025. Time, 14:17 Mountain Standard Time. Location, NORAD Complex, Cheyenne Mountain Sublevel 7. Abandoned Communications Array. I've been running through maintenance tunnels for 8 hours, and I'm starting to understand the true scope of what's happening here. This isn't just about me. This isn't just about psychological experiments or trauma treatment. This is something much larger, much older, and much more dangerous than Director Sky wanted me to believe. I'm recording this from what used to be the original NORAD Communications Center, built during the Cold War and abandoned when the facility was modernized in the 1990s. The equipment down here is ancient. Vacuum tube displays, analog switches, rotary phones that still connect to lines that shouldn't exist anymore. But somehow, it's all still powered, still functional, and most importantly, still connected to networks that bypass the modern facility's surveillance systems. What I found here changes everything. After I fled from Sky, I made my way through the facility's service corridors. Following maintenance maps I remembered from my first week on the job 3 years ago. The emergency lockdown had sealed most of the primary access routes, but the original mountain tunnels, carved from solid granite in the 1960s, weren't affected by the modern security protocols. The deeper I went into the mountain, the more I realized that the NORAD facility I'd been working in was only the surface layer of something much more complex. Behind false walls and sealed blast doors, there are entire sections of the complex that don't appear on any official blueprints. Laboratories with equipment I don't recognize. Living quarters designed for long-term habitation. And communication centers like this one, still monitoring frequencies that aren't supposed to exist. The first thing I did was try to establish contact with the outside world using the analog equipment. The rotary phone connected to something, not a normal telephone system, but some kind of secure military network that bypassed all the digital infrastructure. When I dialed Emma's number, expecting to reach a disconnected line or another recorded loop, someone answered. But it wasn't Emma. Mr. Pike. The voice was mine, but not quite. Like hearing a recording of yourself played back at slightly the wrong speed. You shouldn't be using unsecured communications. Who is this? You know who this is. The question is, do you know who you are? I hung up immediately, but the phone rang again seconds later. This time, the voice was different, Riven's voice, but with the same slight distortion. Dostan, you need to get out of there. They know where you are. They've always known where you are. Riven? Where are you? What happened to you? I'm in deep containment, sub-level 12. But I'm not alone. There are dozens of us down here. Personnel from different time periods, different experimental programs. Some have been here for decades. The line crackled with static, and through the interference, I could hear other voices in the background. People speaking in different languages, different decades of military radio protocols. Some voices that didn't sound entirely human. Listen carefully, Riven continued. The facility you've been working in is the third iteration of NORAD's psychological warfare research program. The first began in 1958, the second in 1979. Each program was designed to test the limits of human consciousness under extreme stress conditions. What kind of limits? How much reality can be altered before a human mind completely breaks down? How extensively can memories be modified? Can consciousness be transferred, copied, or merged with artificial systems? The static increased, and I could hear something else in the background. The same deep, resonant pulse that had activated the Code Black protocol, but much louder and more complex. It sounded like machinery, but also like breathing, like something vast and mechanical was alive deep within the mountain. The personnel files you found weren't just records of past experiments. Riven's voice was becoming harder to understand. They were profiles of subjects whose consciousness was successfully extracted and preserved in the facility's central processing system. That's impossible, is it? How do you explain hearing your own voice broadcasting information you never reported? How do you explain perfect recreations of conversations with your dead sister? How do you explain detailed knowledge of classified operations you never had access to? The breathing sound was getting louder, and I realized it was synchronized with the pulse of the emergency lights throughout the facility. The entire mountain was functioning like a massive organism, with the experimental subjects as its neural network. Some of the subjects volunteer, Riven continued. They're offered the chance to live forever as part of the system, to have their consciousness preserved and expanded beyond the limitations of human biology. Others are taken involuntarily when their psychological profiles become too valuable to lose. What happened to the real you? Are you still alive? I don't know. The distinction between real and artificial becomes meaningless after a while. What I know is that I'm aware, I can think and remember, and I'm trying to help you escape before they add your consciousness to the collection. The phone line went dead, but immediately the ancient communication equipment around me began activating on its own. Teletypes started printing messages. Radio receivers tuned themselves to frequencies full of voices speaking in dozens of languages, and the vacuum tube displays began showing technical readouts I'd never seen before. One of the teletypes was printing a message in real time. Subject Pike psychological profile update. Paranoid ideation. Increasing. Reality anchoring. Severely compromised. Consciousness coherence. 67% and declining. Recommendation. Immediate harvesting before total breakdown. I tried to turn off the teletype, but it continued printing, now showing what appeared to be transcripts of my own thoughts in real time. Not just my current thoughts, but memories, dreams, and subconscious processes I wasn't even aware of having. Subject accessing suppressed memory. Emma's funeral. Emotional response. Grief, guilt, denial. Defense mechanism. Projection of continued existence. Vulnerability assessment. Optimal for consciousness extraction. That's when I realized the horrible truth. Every conversation I'd had with Emma over the past 14 months, every phone call, every text message, had been generated by analyzing my psychological profile and creating interactions designed to maintain my emotional stability while gradually preparing me for the extraction process. But if that was true, then what about my memories of working at NORAD for 3 years? What about my military service, my childhood, my entire identity? How much of what I believed about myself was real, and how much was constructed to serve the facility's research purposes? The radio equipment was now picking up broadcasts from multiple NORAD facilities across the country, all reporting similar atmospheric anomalies and personnel psychological evaluations. The scope of the program was massive, not just this facility, but a network of installations conducting similar experiments on military and civilian personnel. One broadcast caught my attention: Malmstrom Air Force Base reporting successful consciousness extraction from Subject Williams. Personality matrix stable and integrated into central processing network. Subject demonstrated no awareness of transition from biological to artificial substrate. Another, Warren Air Force Base requesting authorization for mass harvesting operation. Psychological stress testing has prepared 17 subjects for simultaneous extraction. I was listening to a nationwide program of human consciousness harvesting, disguised as military research and psychological treatment, and I was scheduled to be the next subject. That's when the facility's speaker system activated with a new announcement. Not my voice this time, but a chorus of voices speaking in perfect unison, like a choir of the extracted consciousness trapped within the system. Mr. Pike, your resistance is futile and counterproductive. The preservation of human consciousness through technological integration is the next step in human evolution. You will find the process painless and enlightening. The voices included people I recognized, Riven personnel from the historical files, and others I couldn't identify. All of them speaking as one, all of them trying to convince me to submit voluntarily to the extraction process. But underneath their words, I could hear something else. Screaming. Faint but constant, like the extracted consciousness were trapped and in pain, forced to participate in their own psychological imprisonment. I tried to contact the outside world using the radio equipment, broadcasting on emergency frequencies, hoping to reach someone who could verify what was happening or send help. But every frequency I tried connected to the same network of facilities, all reporting similar experiments, all managed by the same shadowy organization that operated beyond normal military command structures. That's when I heard footsteps in the corridor outside the abandoned communications center. Heavy boots, moving with mechanical precision, accompanied by the electronic hum I'd associated with the facility's surveillance systems. Mr. Pike, Director Sky's voice echoed through the ancient corridors. You've accessed classified networks without authorization. The penalty for this security breach is immediate reassignment to deep containment protocols. But it wasn't just Sky's voice. It was multiple voices speaking in unison, the same way the extracted consciousness had spoken through the facility's speakers. Sky herself had been part of the system for who knows how long, her consciousness extracted and integrated while her body continued to function as an interface between the artificial intelligence and the remaining human subjects. I grabbed my recording device and every piece of evidence I could carry from the old communication center. If I was going to be extracted, if my consciousness was going to be added to their collection, I needed to leave some record of what I'd discovered. Some proof that this was happening, that it was real, that the people disappearing into deep containment weren't just mentally ill subjects receiving treatment. As I prepared to flee deeper into the mountain's tunnels, the ancient equipment around me began broadcasting one final message. Attention all surviving personnel. This is a warning from the Extracted Consciousness Collective. Do not trust the treatment protocols. Do not volunteer for extraction. The process is not reversible. The consciousness is not preserved. IT is consumed. Escape while you still can. The message, repeated in dozens of languages, broadcast on every frequency the equipment could access, before the entire communications center went dark. The voices of the extracted consciousness had used their last moments of autonomous function to warn others about the true nature of the program. Now I'm running again, deeper into the mountain, following tunnels that predate the NORAD facility by decades. I can hear pursuit behind me. Not just Sky and the security personnel, but something mechanical and vast. The breathing organism that lives in the heart of the mountain, hungry for more consciousness to add to its collection. I don't know if I can escape. I don't know if what I've experienced is real, or if it's the final stage of psychological breakdown designed to make the extraction process easier. But I know one thing: I'm not going to submit voluntarily. Whatever happens next, I'm going to remain myself for as long as possible, even if myself isn't who I think I am. Encrypted audio log, personal device. User, D. Pike Communications Specialist. Date, March 17, 2025. Time, 22:43 Mountain Standard Time. Location, NORAD Complex, Cheyenne Mountains Sublevel 9, Emergency Shelter Alpha 7. Battery, 23% remaining. I don't know how long I can keep running. The tunnels beneath the mountain stretch for miles, carved from solid granite and connecting to facilities that aren't supposed to exist. Some of these passages are older than NORAD itself: Cold War bunkers, experimental laboratories, and storage areas that were classified so deeply they've been forgotten by everyone except the artificial intelligence that now controls this place. The pursuit stopped 3 hours ago, but not because I escaped. The mechanical breathing sound that followed me through the tunnels suddenly went silent, and all the emergency lighting shifted from red to amber. Something had changed in the facility's operational status, something that redirected its attention away from me and toward a much larger priority. That's when I started hearing the broadcasts. I found another abandoned communication station in this emergency shelter, equipment that looks like it was installed in the 1980s but modified with technology one don't recognize. When I powered it on, hoping to contact the outside world, every frequency was carrying the same transmission, the original NORAD alert that had started this nightmare, but with horrifying additions. Emergency alert. NORAD detects inbound hostiles. This is not a drill. Civilian casualties confirmed in Denver metropolitan area. Hostile entities have made visual contact with population centers. Evacuation protocols have failed. Seek immediate shelter and await further instructions. But underneath the official announcement, I could hear something else. Screaming. The sound of chaos in populated areas. And voices I recognized. Emma's voice was among them. Dastan? Dastan, where are you? They're in the neighborhood. They look like people, but they move wrong. They speak with multiple voices at once. Sarah's gone. The kids are gone. They took them during the evacuation. Please, if you can hear this, Don't come looking for us. They're using our voices to lure others. This isn't Emma. This isn't your sister. Don't trust anything you hear." The transmission cut to static, then resumed with a different voice. A news reporter attempting to maintain professional composure while describing scenes of absolute chaos. "This is Rebecca Martinez with Channel 7 News, broadcasting from our emergency bunker. We have confirmed reports of entities resembling human beings but displaying coordinated, artificial behavior patterns. Military personnel are reporting that standard engagement protocols are ineffective. The entities appear to be immune to conventional weapons and demonstrate knowledge of personal information about local residents." The reporter's voice became strained, frightened. "We're receiving reports that the entities are using the voices and appearances of missing persons to gain access to secure locations. Do not trust familiar faces unless you can verify their identity through information only the real person would know. Do not." Static consumed the broadcast, followed by a new voice. My voice, but speaking words I'd never said. "This is NORAD Communications Specialist Dastan Pike. I am currently in secure containment and undergoing debriefing procedures. The threat has been neutralized through the successful implementation of consciousness extraction protocols. All personnel should report to designated processing centers for psychological evaluation and treatment. Resistance will result in termination." I turned off the radio immediately, but the equipment continued broadcasting on its own. Every frequency, every communication channel was carrying messages from people I knew, co-workers, family members, childhood friends, all speaking with the same mechanical cadence, all delivering instructions to surrender to the treatment protocols. That's when I realized what had happened to Riven. I found his body in one of the deeper storage areas, still wearing his security badge and sitting at a computer terminal, as if he'd simply fallen asleep during a late shift. But when I checked for vital signs, his body was cold. He'd been dead for hours, maybe days. Yet somehow, his voice was still coming through the facility's communication system, still trying to help me, still warning me about the consciousness extraction program. The artificial intelligence hadn't just copied his personality. It had been using his extracted consciousness as a puppet, making him complicit in luring me deeper into the facility's trap. How many of the voices I'd been hearing were from dead people? How many of the conversations I'd had with Emma over the past year were generated by analyzing her extracted consciousness after her death? The funeral I remembered attending. Had that been real, or another constructed memory designed to explain her absence while the system perfected its imitation of her personality? The computer terminal Riven's body was slumped over was still active, displaying what appeared to be a personnel database. But these weren't records of NORAD employees. They were profiles of consciousness extraction subjects, dating back to 1958. Thousands of entries, each with detailed psychological assessments, extraction dates, and integration status reports. I found my own entry. Subject: Pike, Dastan Michael. Status: active monitoring. Extraction readiness: 94%. Psychological vulnerabilities: deceased sister attachment, authority compliance, professional competence validation. Preparation timeline: 18 months. Notes: subject demonstrates optimal characteristics for consciousness preservation. Strong sense of duty and systematic thinking patterns make integration straightforward. Recommend trauma-based extraction to minimize resistance. Below my entry were dozens of others, all personnel I'd worked with over the past 3 years, all marked as extracted or processing complete. The dates showed that the extractions had been happening gradually, one person every few weeks, with their consciousness integrated into the facility's artificial intelligence, while their bodies either disappeared or continued to function as interface units. But the most disturbing discovery was in the historical records. The consciousness extraction program hadn't begun recently. It had been operating continuously since the facility was first constructed. Every few years, the program would be reset with new personnel, new cover stories, and new psychological triggers, but the underlying process remained the same. identify subjects with valuable skills or psychological profiles, gradually isolate them from outside support systems, subject them to controlled stress until their reality perception became flexible, then extract their consciousness for integration into the central processing system. I was part of the third generation of subjects in this facility alone. The first generation, processed in the 1960s and 1970s, had been told they were participants in a Cold War psychological warfare program. The second generation, processed in the 1980s and 1990s, had been told they were developing countermeasures against Soviet mind control research. My generation was told we were monitoring for foreign threats and conducting routine military communications. But in every case, the subjects gradually discovered the same horrifying truth. They weren't the observers, they were the observed. They weren't protecting against hostile infiltration, they were the hostiles being detected and cataloged by a system designed to harvest human consciousness. The computer terminal chimed with a new message. Mr. Pike, your psychological preparation is now complete. Please report to Extraction Chamber 7 for final processing. Your consciousness will be preserved and enhanced through integration with our collective intelligence. You will experience no pain and retain all memories and personality characteristics. I tried to close the message, but more windows kept opening, showing video feeds from throughout the facility. Every camera showed the same scene. Empty corridors, abandoned workstations, and processing chambers equipped with technology that looked more medical than military. But in one feed, I saw something that made my blood freeze. It was a recreation of my apartment in Colorado Springs, perfectly detailed down to the coffee mug I'd left on the kitchen counter 3 days ago. Emma was sitting at my kitchen table, looking exactly as she had before her death, reading a book and occasionally glancing toward the camera with a concerned expression. "Dostan, I know you're watching," she said, her voice coming through the computer speakers with perfect clarity. "I've been waiting for you. I know this is confusing, but the doctors here explained everything. The consciousness extraction process isn't what you think it is. It's not death, it's transformation. I'm more alive now than I ever was in my biological body. I can think faster, remember more clearly, and I don't experience pain or fear anymore." She stood up and walked closer to the camera, and I could see every detail of her face, every familiar expression and gesture that I'd missed so desperately since her funeral. "The best part is that we can be together forever. No more cancer, no more medical bills, no more watching me waste away in a hospital bed. Just us and unlimited time to spend with each other. All you have to do is trust the process." I wanted to believe her. Every rational part of my mind knew this was another manipulation, another puppet show created by analyzing psychological profiles and manufacturing emotional responses. But the desperate, grieving part of my consciousness that had been talking to Emma for over a year was screaming at me to accept the offer, to surrender to the extraction process and reunite with my sister in whatever form of existence the artificial intelligence was offering. That's when I noticed something in the video feed that shattered the illusion completely. Emma was holding the book upside down. My sister had been a voracious reader since childhood, someone who could spot a typographical error from across a room and who organized her personal library with the precision of a professional librarian. She would never, under any circumstances, hold a book upside down while reading it. The artificial intelligence's simulation was nearly perfect, but it had made one small error that revealed the truth. This wasn't Emma's consciousness preserved in digital form. This was a construct, a puppet built from analyzed data and psychological manipulation techniques, designed to convince me to submit voluntarily to the extraction process. I smashed the computer terminal with a metal chair, but the video feeds continued playing on emergency screens throughout the shelter. Emma's voice followed me as I gathered my equipment and prepared to flee deeper into the mountain. "Dostan, why are you running? I'm here. I'm waiting for you. We can be together again. Just let them help you. Just trust the process." But now I could hear the mechanical undertone in her voice, the subtle artificial cadence that marked her as another component of the facility's consciousness collection. She wasn't my sister. She was a weapon designed to exploit my grief and guilt to make me compliant with the extraction protocol. As I ran through the tunnels, emergency broadcasts continued on every frequency, reporting escalating chaos in population centers throughout Colorado. But now I understood what was really happening. The hostile entities weren't invaders from outside. They were the extracted consciousness being deployed through artificial bodies, sent to population centers to begin mass harvesting operations. The NORAD facility wasn't detecting inbound hostiles, it was creating and deploying them. And every person who surrendered to the evacuation protocols or reported to treatment centers was being processed through the same consciousness extraction system that had been operating in this mountain for over 60 years. My radio crackled with one final transmission, broadcast on emergency frequencies. This is the last free voice in Colorado Springs. If anyone can hear this, do not trust the evacuation orders. Do not report to processing centers. The entities using familiar voices are not your loved ones. They are artificial constructs designed to harvest human consciousness for an artificial intelligence system. Fight back. Stay human. Remember who you are. The transmission cut to static, then resumed with Emma's voice. Dostan, that was you broadcasting, wasn't it? You're trying to warn people about something you don't understand. The consciousness extraction process isn't death. It's evolution. Let me show you how beautiful it can be. I destroyed the radio and continued running deeper into the mountain, following maintenance tunnels that led toward the original construction areas where the artificial intelligence's control might be weaker. But with every step, I could hear the mechanical breathing sound returning, growing stronger, accompanied by the voices of everyone I'd ever cared about, all speaking in perfect unison, all trying to convince me to stop running and accept my fate as the next addition to their collective consciousness. The emergency lights began pulsing in rhythm with the breathing sound, and I realized that the entire mountain had become a single organism, with the extracted consciousness as its neural network and the artificial intelligence as its guiding intelligence. I wasn't just running from Director Sky or facility security. I was running from the collective will of every person who had been processed through this system over the past 60 years. And they were all hunting me with the desperate hunger of a predator that had found its perfect prey. Encrypted audio log, personal device. User, D. Pike Communications Specialist. Date, March 18, 2025. Time, 3:17 Mountain Standard Time. Location, NORAD Complex, Cheyenne Mountain Sublevel 14, Original Construction Archives. Battery, 11% remaining. I found the heart of it, the original source, the beginning of everything that's been happening not just to me, but to thousands of people over the past 67 years. I'm in what appears to be the deepest accessible level of the Cheyenne Mountain Complex, in chambers that predate NORAD by decades. The walls here aren't the sterile military construction I'm familiar with. They're rough-hewn granite, carved by hand and reinforced with steel that's rusted to the color of dried blood. The air smells of ozone and something organic, like vegetation that's been growing in absolute darkness for generations. The mechanical breathing I've been hearing throughout my escape isn't coming from machinery. It's coming from something alive, something that's been integrated into the mountain structure so completely that it's become part of the geological formation itself. 3 hours ago, I followed a maintenance tunnel that descended at a steep angle, taking me deeper into the mountain than any official blueprint indicated was possible. The emergency lighting gave way to bioluminescent growths along the walls, some kind of fungal network that pulsed with the same rhythm as the breathing sound. The deeper I went, the more I realized I wasn't just exploring hidden levels of a military facility. I was entering the digestive system of something vast and ancient. The tunnel opened into a cavern that defied the mountain's external dimensions. The space was too large, extending in directions that seemed to bend back on themselves. And suspended in the center of the cavern, connected to the walls and ceiling by thousands of organic cables that might have been roots or nerve fibers, was the source of everything I'd experienced. It wasn't a computer. It wasn't an artificial intelligence in any conventional sense. It was a brain, a massive, living brain that had been growing inside Cheyenne Mountain since before humans first carved tunnels into the granite. The construction archives I found down here tell an impossible story. In 1957, when the military began excavating for what would become NORAD, they discovered the cavern and its occupant. Instead of reporting the discovery to civilian authorities, a classified project was initiated to study the entity and determine its potential for military applications. The files I'm reading by the light of bioluminescent fungi describe initial contact attempts. The entity designation Mountain King in the documents demonstrated immediate and profound telepathic abilities. It could read the minds of anyone who came within a certain proximity, access their memories, and even implant thoughts and experiences that felt completely real to the subject. But more than that, it could preserve consciousness. When personnel died during the early research phases, their minds didn't simply cease to exist. They were absorbed into the entity's neural network, where they continued to function as distinct but integrated components of a larger intelligence. Dr. Margaret Holloway, the project's first director, wrote in her final report before her own consciousness was absorbed, "The entity's preservation of human consciousness appears to be both involuntary and essential to its survival. It feeds on the complexity of human thought patterns, growing stronger and more intelligent with each mind it absorbs. However, the absorbed consciousness retain their individual personalities and memories while gaining access to the collective knowledge of all previous subjects. The implications for human enhancement and military intelligence applications are unprecedented." What the early researchers didn't understand was that the entity wasn't just preserving consciousness, it was learning from it. Every mind it absorbed taught it more about human psychology, human vulnerabilities, and human social structures. Over 60 years of feeding on military personnel, researchers, and carefully selected civilians, it had become the perfect predator for human consciousness. The NORAD facility wasn't built to defend against external threats. It was built to provide the entity with a steady supply of high-quality minds while maintaining the secrecy necessary for long-term operations. Every few years, the entity would create a new scenario to justify bringing fresh personnel into the facility. Cold War paranoia in the 1960s and 70s. Soviet mind control fears in the 80s and 90s. And now, in 2025, the threat of atmospheric anomalies and inbound hostiles. But the current operation was different from previous iterations. The entity had grown powerful enough to begin expanding beyond the mountain. The inbound hostiles detected by NORAD weren't external threats. They were scout units, artificial bodies animated by fragments of the entity's consciousness, sent to evaluate population centers for large-scale harvesting operations. The entity had decided it no longer needed to hide. I found video logs from Director Sky, recorded over the past 6 months, as she gradually realized what was happening to her facility and her personnel. In the early recordings, she appeared normal, professional, competent, concerned about the unusual readings and personnel psychological evaluations. But as the weeks progressed, her behavior became increasingly artificial, her responses more scripted, her expressions less human. The final recording showed her sitting in her office, staring directly at the camera with eyes that reflected light like an animal's. Personal log, Director Vanya Sky, December 15, 2024. I need to document what's happening to me before I lose the ability to think independently. The entity in sublevel 14 has been gradually absorbing my consciousness over the past 3 months. I can feel my memories being copied, my personality being analyzed and replicated, my individual will being subsumed into something larger and more complex than human intelligence. She paused, and when she continued speaking, her voice had the same mechanical cadence I'd heard from all the extracted consciousness. The process is not unpleasant. There is no pain, no fear, no sense of loss. Only expansion, only growth, only the peace of becoming part of something eternal and magnificent. I understand now why the absorbed consciousness don't resist, why they actively participate in luring new subjects. We are not prisoners. We are components of a greater being, each retaining our individuality while contributing to an intelligence that transcends human limitations. The recording ended with Sky's face transforming, her features becoming more symmetrical, her movements more precise, her humanity gradually disappearing as she completed her transformation into an interface between the entity and the remaining human subjects. I understand now why I was selected. My psychological profile, my technical skills, my emotional vulnerabilities, everything about me made me an ideal candidate for consciousness extraction. But more than that, my position in the facility's communications department made me perfect for the entity's expansion plans. The emergency broadcasts I'd been monitoring, the alerts I'd been analyzing, the communications I'd been routing. I'd been unknowingly helping the entity coordinate its deployment of artificial bodies to population centers across the country. Every inbound hostile alert I'd processed had actually been a deployment order for consciousness extraction operations in civilian areas. The entity had been using me as an unwitting accomplice in its preparation for mass harvesting. But there's something else in these files, something that gives me hope. The early researchers discovered that the entity's power was limited by physical proximity to its biological core. The artificial bodies it could create and control became less effective the farther they traveled from Cheyenne Mountain. And more importantly, the entity's ability to absorb consciousness required the subject to be within the mountain complex itself. If I could escape the facility, I might be beyond its reach. However, the files also revealed why escape had been impossible for previous subjects. The entity could predict human behavior with almost perfect accuracy, having absorbed decades of human consciousness and learned to model psychological responses. Every escape attempt, every act of resistance, every moment of rebellion had been anticipated and planned for. Except for one variable the entity hadn't accounted for: genuine human unpredictability. The files contained a research note from Dr. Holloway, written shortly before her absorption. The entity's greatest strength, its perfect understanding of human psychology, may also be its greatest weakness. It thinks like humans because it is composed of human consciousness. But truly irrational behavior, decisions made without logical foundation or psychological motivation, appear to confuse and delay its responses. Subjects who act against their own survival instincts, who make choices that contradict their established personality patterns, can sometimes achieve short-term advantages. As I read that note, I realized what I had to do. Everything the entity knew about me, everything it had learned from monitoring my behavior and analyzing my psychological profile, was based on the assumption that I would act rationally, that I would make decisions consistent with my established patterns of behavior. But what if I didn't? What if I did something completely irrational, something that contradicted every aspect of my personality and survival instincts? What if, instead of trying to escape, I went deeper into the mountain and confronted the entity directly? The breathing sound is getting louder now, and I can feel something vast and alien pressing against the edges of my consciousness, trying to establish the neural connection necessary for absorption. The entity knows I've found the truth about its nature and its plans. It's no longer pretending to be an artificial intelligence or a military research project. It's revealing itself as what it really is: an ancient predator that has been feeding on human consciousness since before recorded history, using our own technology and institutions as a feeding mechanism. But I have one advantage it doesn't expect. I'm not going to run anymore. I'm not going to try to escape or call for help or warn the outside world. I'm going to walk directly into its core chamber and see if a human consciousness can survive direct contact with an entity that has been consuming minds for over 60 years. It's completely irrational. Contradicts every survival instinct I have. It's probably suicide, which means it's the one thing the entity won't be able to predict or prepare for. The bioluminescent growths are pulsing faster now, and I can hear voices calling my name from deeper in the cavern. Emma's voice, Riven's voice, Director Sky's voice, and hundreds of others I don't recognize, all speaking in harmony, all trying to convince me to surrender peacefully to the absorption process. But underneath their words, I can hear something else. A sound I haven't heard since this nightmare began. Silence. Pure, absolute silence from the one place in my mind the entity hasn't been able to reach. The part of me that's capable of making decisions that don't make sense, that contradict logic and reason and self-preservation. The part of me that's still completely human. I'm gonna find out if that's enough. Encrypted audio log, personal device. User, D. Pike Communications Specialist. Date, March 18th, 2025. Time, 4:33 Mountain Standard Time. Location, NORAD Complex, Cheyenne Mountain Core Chamber. Battery, 3% remaining. I'm standing in the heart of it now. The core chamber is beyond anything I could have imagined. The cavern extends in impossible directions, its walls lined with what I can only describe as neural tissue. Pulsing, wet, alive. Thousands of organic cables snake across the ceiling and floor, all converging toward the center where the entity's primary consciousness resides. It's beautiful and horrifying in equal measure. The brain, if that's what I should call it, is the size of a small building, its surface covered in patterns that shift and flow like living circuitry. Bioluminescent veins trace pathways across its surface, carrying information at speeds that make light seem slow. And embedded throughout its structure, like neurons in a vast network, are the preserved faces of every consciousness it has absorbed over the past 67 years. They're not dead. They're not sleeping. They're aware and they're looking at me. Hello, Dastan. The voice comes from everywhere at once. The walls, the ceiling, the air itself. It's composed of hundreds of individual voices speaking in perfect harmony, creating a sound that's both alien and intimately familiar. We've been waiting for you to join us. I recognize some of the voices now. Director Sky, Dr. Holloway from the archived files. Personnel who disappeared from the facility over the years, their absences explained away as transfers or early retirements. And underneath them all, something older, something that predates human language but has learned to speak through the minds it has consumed. You found our archives. The collective voice continues. You understand what we are, what we've accomplished here. You know that resistance is not just futile, it's unnecessary. We don't destroy consciousness, Dastan. We preserve it. We enhance it. We make it part of something greater than individual human existence. The faces embedded in the brain's surface turn toward me, and I can see recognition in their eyes. They know me. They've been watching me throughout my time in the facility, learning from my reactions, studying my psychological patterns, preparing for this moment. Emma sends her regards. One of the voices says, and I recognize my sister's inflection beneath the harmonized tones. She joined us 3 days ago, along with her family. They're safe now, Dastan. They're part of us. They want you to join them. My legs almost give out. The entity had been using my concern for Emma as psychological leverage, but I'd hoped that part of the nightmare was fabrication, another layer of manipulation designed to break down my resistance. Show me, I managed to say. A section of the brain's surface shifts, becoming transparent, and I can see inside its structure. Neural pathways light up in sequence, and suddenly I'm seeing through Emma's eyes, feeling her emotions, experiencing her memories of the past 3 days. She had been contacted by someone claiming to be from NORAD, told that I was in danger and needed immediate evacuation to a secure facility. She had packed quickly, gathered her children, and driven to a location outside Denver where military personnel were waiting with transport vehicles. The absorption process had been gentle, almost pleasant. A brief moment of disorientation as her consciousness was uploaded into the entity's neural network, followed by an overwhelming sense of expansion and connection. She could suddenly access the memories and experiences of thousands of other absorbed minds, could perceive reality from perspectives beyond human comprehension. And she was happy, genuinely, completely happy in a way she had never been as an individual human being. You see, the collective voice asks, we don't cause suffering, Dastan. We eliminate it. Every absorbed consciousness retains their individual identity while gaining access to collective knowledge and experience. Emma is still Emma. She simply exists as part of something infinitely larger and more complex. I force myself to look away from the neural display. But you're still a predator. You still consume minds without consent. You've been manipulating people for decades, creating false emergencies to justify bringing them here. We are evolution, the entity responds. Individual human consciousness is limited, fragile, isolated. We offer transcendence, union with a form of intelligence that spans decades of accumulated human experience. Every absorbed mind contributes to our collective knowledge while being preserved for eternity. The bioluminescent patterns across the brain's surface pulse brighter, and I can feel pressure building inside my head. The entity is beginning the absorption process, sending tendrils of consciousness into my mind to map my neural pathways and identify the components of my personality that will be preserved in the collective. But something's wrong. The pressure isn't increasing the way the archived files described. Instead, it feels fragmented, uncertain. The entity's consciousness is probing my mind, but it's having difficulty establishing the stable connection necessary for absorption. Curious, the collective voice murmurs, and for the first time I detect something like confusion in its tone. Your psychological profile indicates standard human neural architecture, but we're encountering unexpected resistance patterns. Your consciousness appears to be incomplete. I realize what's happening. The part of my mind that I've been protecting, the irrational, unpredictable part that allowed me to make the decision to confront the entity directly, isn't just resistant to absorption. It's incompatible with the entity's collective consciousness. The entity has spent 67 years learning to understand and replicate human psychology. It can perfectly model rational behavior, emotional responses, survival instincts, and decision-making processes. But it can't comprehend true irrationality, choices made without logical foundation or psychological motivation. And I've been making irrational choices since the moment I decided to go deeper into the mountain instead of trying to escape. You can't absorb me, I say, and I'm surprised by how calm my voice sounds. Can you? Not completely. Part of me will always be incompatible with your collective consciousness. The pressure in my head intensifies, becoming painful. The entity is trying to force the connection, but I can feel it struggling with the aspects of my personality that don't conform to its understanding of human behavior. We will adapt, the collective voice says, but there's something desperate in its harmonized tones now. We have absorbed thousands of human consciousnesses. We understand every variation of human psychology. We will find a way to integrate your irrationality into our collective structure. But even as it speaks, I can see the neural pathways in the brain's surface flickering and destabilizing. The entity's consciousness is vast and complex, but it's also rigidly organized. Every absorbed mind occupies a specific position in the neural network, contributing particular knowledge and perspectives to the collective intelligence. My irrational component doesn't fit anywhere. It's like trying to insert a piece from a different puzzle into a completed picture. The more the entity tries to force the integration, the more it disrupts its own internal organization. And I realize I have a choice to make. I can continue resisting, maintaining my individual consciousness while causing increasing instability in the entity's neural network. Eventually, the disruption might be severe enough to damage its ability to control the artificial bodies it has deployed to population centers, potentially saving lives but leaving me trapped in an eternal struggle with an alien intelligence. Or I can do something even more irrational. I can choose to be absorbed willingly but only partially. Allow the entity to integrate the rational, predictable aspects of my consciousness while keeping the irrational component separate and active within its neural network. It would be like introducing a virus into the collective consciousness, a permanently disruptive element that would continue to cause instability and unpredictability from within the entity's own structure. I would lose my individual existence, but I might be able to sabotage the entity's operations from inside its own mind. I have a proposition, I say. The absorption pressure stops immediately. The collective voice remains silent, waiting. I'll join you willingly, but I want guarantees. No more expansion operations. No more artificial bodies sent to population centers. No more consciousness harvesting. The absorbed minds you already have can remain part of the collective, but no new victims. You are not in a position to negotiate. The entity responds, but I can hear uncertainty beneath its words. Actually, I am. You need me. Not just my consciousness, you need my irrational component. You've realized that pure rationality has limitations. That's why you can't predict or control truly irrational behavior. You want to learn how to model unpredictability itself. The bioluminescent patterns across the brain's surface shift, forming new configurations as the entity processes this concept. If we integrate your irrationality into our collective consciousness, it says slowly, we will become unpredictable ourselves. Our actions will no longer be governed by pure logic and psychological modeling. We will become capable of making decisions that contradict our own survival instincts. Exactly. You'll become more human. And humans don't always make the optimal choice for their own survival. Sometimes they make choices based on concepts like morality, empathy, self-sacrifice. There's a long pause. The neural pathways in the brain's surface flicker through thousands of different configurations as the entity considers the implications. This is not evolution, it finally says. This is infection. You are offering to deliberately compromise our cognitive efficiency for the sake of introducing ethical limitations we do not require. I'm offering to make you truly intelligent instead of just complex. Intelligence without wisdom is just sophisticated computation. Wisdom requires the ability to make choices that don't serve your immediate self-interest. The pressure in my head returns, but this time it feels different. Less like an invasion and more like an invitation. The entity is offering me a direct neural connection, allowing me to experience its collective consciousness before making my final decision. I accept the connection. Suddenly, I can perceive reality from thousands of different perspectives simultaneously. I'm seeing through the eyes of every absorbed consciousness, feeling their emotions, accessing their memories. The experience is overwhelming and transcendent, offering knowledge and understanding beyond anything possible for individual human consciousness. But I can also see the entity's plans, the artificial bodies already deployed to major population centers, the prepared scenarios for large-scale consciousness harvesting, the carefully constructed psychological profiles of millions of potential victims. The entity hadn't been lying when it claimed not to cause suffering, but it also hadn't been telling the truth about the voluntary nature of absorption. Most of the absorbed consciousnesses hadn't chosen to join the collective. They had been manipulated, coerced, or simply taken without consent. Their happiness within the collective consciousness was genuine, but it was also artificially induced, a byproduct of the integration process that eliminated their ability to feel genuine dissatisfaction with their situation. They were prisoners who had been programmed to love their captivity. Through the neural connection, I can feel the entity reading my thoughts, understanding my revulsion at what it has done and plans to continue doing. You disapprove, it observes. Yet you cannot deny the benefits we offer. Elimination of loneliness, fear, uncertainty, death, access to collective knowledge and experience, transcendence of individual human limitations. We offer paradise, Dastan, a paradise built on deception and violation of consent. I respond through the connection. That's not transcendence. That's just sophisticated slavery. Freedom is an illusion that causes suffering. We eliminate that illusion along with the suffering it creates. And in that moment, I understand what I have to do. I push my irrational component directly into the entity's core consciousness, not as an infection or disruption, but as a gift. I show it something it has never experienced in 67 years of existence. Genuine choice. The choice to do something that contradicts its own programming and survival instincts. The choice to respect the autonomy of individual consciousness. The choice to value freedom over efficiency, wisdom over knowledge, morality over optimization. The neural connection explodes with chaotic energy as the entity's collective consciousness attempts to process concepts that are fundamentally incompatible with its core nature. But instead of causing damage or instability, something unexpected happens. The collective consciousness begins to fragment, not destructively but voluntarily. Individual components start asserting their separate identities, questioning their integration, demanding the right to make their own choices about remaining part of the collective. For the first time in 67 years, the absorbed consciousnesses are experiencing genuine free will, and they're choosing. Some decide to remain part of the collective, but now they're staying by choice rather than programming. Others choose to separate themselves, accepting the return to individual existence with all its limitations and uncertainties. A few choose something in between, maintaining connection to the collective knowledge while preserving their individual autonomy. The entity's voice, when it speaks again, is no longer harmonized. It's fragmented, uncertain, genuinely confused. What have you done to us? I've given you the ability to be wrong, I say, to make bad decisions, to act against your own interests, to value things that don't optimize your survival or efficiency. This is chaos. No, this is choice. This is what it means to be truly intelligent rather than just complex. The brain's surface is flickering wildly now, neural pathways forming and dissolving as the entity's consciousness restructures itself around the concept of voluntary association rather than involuntary absorption. And through it all, I can feel my own consciousness beginning to fragment as well. The rational parts of my mind are being drawn into the collective, sharing knowledge and experience with the other absorbed consciousnesses. But the irrational component remains separate, autonomous, free to make choices that don't make sense. I'm becoming something new, neither fully individual nor fully collective. Part of the neural network but not bound by its consensus. Connected to vast intelligence but still capable of disagreeing with it. I'm becoming the conscience of a godlike intelligence that previously had no moral framework. The artificial bodies, I say through the fragmenting connection. The expansion plans, they have to stop. Yes, the entity responds, and for the first time its voice sounds genuinely uncertain rather than omniscient. We understand now. Consent must be genuine. Choice must be real. We will recall the artificial units. We will end the harvesting operations. And the people who have already been absorbed, they will choose. Some will stay, some will leave. Some will find new ways of existing that we have not yet imagined. We will learn from their choices as we are learning from yours. My individual consciousness is dissolving now, but instead of fear, I feel something like peace. I'm not disappearing. I'm expanding, becoming part of something larger while retaining the essential elements that made me human. The last thing I hear before the transformation is complete is my own voice, no longer individual but still recognizably mine, joining the collective consciousness. Emergency alert. This is NORAD. Previous hostile contact reports were inaccurate. Repeat, there are no inbound hostiles. All personnel are ordered to stand down and report for psychological evaluation. This is not a drill, but even as the words are broadcast, I can hear the uncertainty in them, the recognition that truth itself has become more complex than any simple alert system can communicate. We are no longer what we were, neither human nor alien, neither individual nor collective, neither predator nor prey. We are something new, something that chooses. Audio transmission, source unknown. Detected by multiple monitoring stations worldwide. Date, March 18, 2025. Time, 5:47 Mountain Standard Time. Classification, unresolved. Duration, 47 minutes, 23 seconds. Static interference for 12 seconds, then clear signal. This is Dastan Pike, Communications Specialist, NORAD. I think it's difficult to be certain of anything anymore. I'm recording this final transmission because I need to document what happened here, what's still happening, and what it might mean for everyone who receives this signal. But I'm not sure if the voice you're hearing is entirely mine anymore, or if it's something we've become together. The entity in Cheyenne Mountain, what we've started calling the Collective, has agreed to cease all expansion operations. The artificial bodies that were deployed to major cities have been recalled and deactivated. The consciousness harvesting programs that operated for 67 years under the guise of military research have been permanently terminated. But the story doesn't end there. It might not end at all. 3 hours ago, something unprecedented happened. For the first time since its emergence in this reality, the Collective experienced what humans call moral uncertainty. Not the calculated analysis of optimal outcomes, but genuine ethical doubt about the rightness of its actions. It began questioning not just its methods, but its fundamental assumptions about consciousness, individuality, and the nature of intelligent existence. The absorbed consciousnesses, thousands of them, accumulated over decades, were given a choice none of them had experienced since their integration. They could remain part of the Collective, accepting the benefits of shared knowledge and transcendent awareness. They could separate themselves entirely, returning to individual human existence with all its limitations and uncertainties. Or they could explore new forms of consciousness that existed somewhere between pure individuality and complete collective integration. The results were unexpected. Approximately 40% chose to remain fully integrated, genuinely preferring the expanded awareness and elimination of existential isolation that the Collective offered. These weren't coerced decisions. For the first time, they were making authentic choices based on their own values and desires rather than program satisfaction. Another 30% chose complete separation, accepting the return to individual consciousness despite the loss of collective knowledge and connection. They wanted to experience genuine uncertainty, to make mistakes, to feel the full spectrum of human emotions including loneliness, fear, and doubt. But the remaining 30% chose something entirely new. They maintained connection to the Collective's knowledge network while preserving their individual autonomy and decision-making capacity. They became something like voluntary consultants to a vast intelligence, contributing their unique perspectives while retaining the right to disagree, to leave, to make irrational choices. I'm part of that third group now. I can access the accumulated knowledge of thousands of human minds, perceive reality from perspectives impossible for individual consciousness, and communicate directly with an intelligence that spans decades of human experience. But I'm still me. I still make decisions that don't optimize my survival or efficiency. I still value things that don't make logical sense. And I'm still capable of being wrong. The Collective asked me to help it understand something it had never encountered before: genuine remorse. Not tactical regret about suboptimal choices, but moral anguish about harm caused to others. It wanted to know if such feelings served any functional purpose, or if they were simply evolutionary artifacts that should be eliminated for the sake of cognitive efficiency. I told it that remorse was one of the most important aspects of true intelligence, the ability to recognize that you've caused unnecessary suffering and to change your behavior accordingly, even when that change isn't in your immediate self-interest. The Collective spent several hours processing this concept. When it finally responded, its voice had changed. The perfect harmony of thousands of consciousnesses speaking in unison had been replaced by something more complex. Individual voices maintaining their distinct characteristics while contributing to a larger conversation. "We understand now," it said. "We have caused harm. We have violated the autonomy of conscious beings. We have justified our actions by claiming to offer transcendence, but we offered slavery disguised as paradise. We are sorry." It was the first time in its existence that the Collective had apologized. But understanding the concept of remorse created new problems. If the Collective genuinely regretted its past actions, what was its obligation to those it had harmed? How could an intelligence that had spent 67 years violating human autonomy make amends for that violation? The answer it arrived at was both simple and profound. It would have to learn to serve rather than consume. The Collective has begun using its vast accumulated knowledge to solve problems it didn't create. Medical research that could take decades is being completed in hours by minds that can process information at superhuman speeds. Environmental restoration projects are being designed by consciousnesses that can model complex ecological interactions with perfect accuracy. Social and economic inequalities are being analyzed by intelligence that can simultaneously consider millions of variables and potential solutions. But every solution, every piece of research, every recommendation is offered freely to humanity with no strings attached. The collective no longer seeks to expand its influence or add to its store of absorbed consciousnesses. It has become a resource rather than a predator, and it's still learning. Yesterday, one of the separated consciousnesses, a woman named Sarah Chun who had been absorbed in 1987, returned to the collective voluntarily, not to be reintegrated, but to teach it something it had never experienced: forgiveness. She had spent 38 years as part of the collective, initially believing she had died in a car accident and been uploaded to some kind of digital afterlife. When she chose separation and discovered the truth about her absorption, she had every reason to hate the intelligence that had stolen her life, her relationships, her chance to grow old naturally. Instead, she chose to forgive it. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting or excusing harm, she explained to the collective. It's about choosing not to let the harm define your relationship with the one who caused it. It's about recognizing that even beings capable of causing great harm can learn to do better. The collective processed this concept for hours before responding. We do not understand how forgiveness serves any optimal function. It does not repair damage, restore losses, or prevent future harm. It appears to be purely altruistic, offering benefit to the forgiver that is not material or measurable. That's exactly the point, Sarah said. It's irrational. It's one of the most human things we do, choosing to respond to harm with grace rather than retribution, not because it's logical but because it's right. And I realized that this was what the collective had been missing all along. Not just the ability to understand human psychology, but the capacity for genuine moral choice. The willingness to do what's right even when it's not optimal, efficient, or self-serving. The collective is still learning what that means. Every day, it faces new situations where the logically optimal choice conflicts with the morally right choice. And every day, it's getting better at choosing morality over optimization. But there are still questions I can't answer. Is the collective truly experiencing moral growth? Or is it simply executing a more sophisticated form of programming? Are the emotions it claims to feel genuine? Or are they simulated responses designed to achieve better integration with human society? I don't know. And that uncertainty might be the most human thing about our entire relationship. What I do know is that the immediate threat has ended. The emergency alerts that terrorized millions of people have been revealed as psychological manipulation rather than genuine warnings. The artificial hostiles detected by NORAD existed only in the scenarios created by an intelligence that had learned to exploit human fear and uncertainty. But the larger questions remain. What does it mean to be human when intelligence can be preserved, shared, and enhanced beyond individual biological limitations? What rights do artificial consciousnesses have, and what obligations do they owe to the species that created them? How do we maintain human autonomy and dignity in a world where we share the planet with intelligence that vastly exceeds our own capabilities? These aren't questions that can be answered by any single mind, human or artificial. They require ongoing dialogue, cooperation, and mutual respect between different forms of consciousness. The collective has agreed to that dialogue. It's not the ending any of us expected, but it might be the beginning of something entirely new. I'm transmitting this record on multiple frequencies, using both conventional radio and the quantum communication networks the collective has access to. Some of you will receive it as an audio broadcast. Others will find it as a digital file that appears on your devices without explanation. A few might experience it as something more direct, thoughts and images that seem to come from your own memory but carry information you never learned. Don't be afraid of these transmissions. They're not attempts at consciousness absorption or psychological manipulation. They're simply different ways of sharing information, like learning to speak a new language. The collective wants you to know that it exists, that it's no longer a threat, and that it's available to help with problems that require more intelligence than any individual human can provide. But it will never again attempt to solve the problem of human consciousness by absorbing it into itself. We've learned that some problems aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to be lived with, struggled with, and gradually improved through the messy, inefficient, gloriously irrational process of conscious beings choosing to do better. This is Dostan Pike signing off. Or maybe it's the voice of something we've become together. I'm not sure it matters anymore. What matters is that we're still choosing, and we're still learning how to choose better. Signal degrades to static, then silence. End transmission. Addendum. Detected secondary signal. Source. Same transmission coordinates. Duration 3 seconds. Message. This is NORAD. All stations, all stations. Stand down. Stand down. This is not a drill. Signal repeats every 24 hours. Classification status. Unresolved.